You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome to the Health Hub on Radio Maria Canada, exploring cutting-edge health and wellness information and therapies, helping you to take your health to the next level. I'm your host, Kathy Biasi, and I'm a holistic nutritionist and a professional cancer coach. How do our thought patterns influence our food choices? And what happens if we label foods as good or bad? Does using food as reward set us on the wrong path to weight loss? On our episode today of the Health Hub, we are talking with Lisa Salisbury about how our mindset impacts our weight loss goals. Lisa is a former chronic dieter on a mission to help women stop obsessing about everything they eat and feel confident in their ability to lose weight without a diet app. She teaches them to stop counting and calculating all their food and check in with their body. Most of all, she helps women make their lives amazing so food doesn't have the job of comforter, compensator, and celebrator. She hosts the Top 100 podcast, Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well. She is a certified health, life, and weight loss coach with a BS in health and human performance. As well as what we talked about, there's what I talked about just a second ago there. We talk about how mindset eating differs from intuitive eating, whether or not a general knowledge of nutrition is enough for us to achieve our weight loss goals, and how our higher brain and our lower brain impact our eating habits. Stay tuned. We will be back in just a few minutes to speak with Lisa Salisbury.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back, everybody. Today's show has been pre-recorded. No opportunity for calling in. Please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, X, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on those locations. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you're in a space, weight loss space, that never, ever easy to navigate. And your approach is something that I love because it's a very individualistic approach. Premises for many people will be the same, application very individualized.
Yes, for sure.
And that's the piece of the puzzle. Now, before we get into things here, do you deal strictly with women?
Not necessarily. They typically are the ones that find me, but I have had a couple of male clients, and one in particular I'm thinking of that was extremely successful. I don't know if you want to hear about his journey, but he came to me during tax season and said, I can't spend another tax season. He was an accountant, just eating my way through. And so he was a really fun client to work with.
Excellent. Well, are we talking about, when you talk about mindset eating, are we talking about intuitive eating? Same thing?
Not necessarily. The difference here is, number one, I'm not an intuitive eating counselor, so I can't claim that training. And one key feature of intuitive eating, and the primary reason why I haven't sought out that certification, is because they avoid any talk or any goal of weight loss. And that's great and very applicable for people, especially those recovering from eating disorders, that they need to allow for whatever their weight does. I often am seeing clients that are telling me, I need to keep up with my kids or grandkids. I need to be able to walk up the stairs without pain. I want to be able to, I had a client that said, I want to be able to carry my camera equipment on this excursion we're doing in Italy, and I want to be able to carry it up this hill. For those kinds of goals, oftentimes, if we take some weight off, our joints feel better. If we take some weight off, we can move around easier. So I do think weight loss is a very, very valid goal. I'm not coaching people to be on a stage. I'm not coaching people to get down to their, wedding weight or even pre-pregnancy weight. I'm coaching people to get to a weight where they're like, this feels better to live my life. I sleep better. I move around better. I'm able to keep up. So that's why I feel like I don't need to get that intuitive eating counselor certification, because I still want to allow for my clients to have a weight loss goal.
When it comes to your clients and wanting to lose weight, or not being able to lose weight, maybe we approach it in that vein. Is it the wrong goal that you think people have set? No, okay, the goal is weight loss, but for the wrong reasons. Do you have to sometimes get into their heads and really, when you said you don't use the stage sort of analogy for people. So, you've got social media coming at you. You've got the ideal weight, the ideal body type, all of that stuff for the different ages. Being able to say, I just want to live a good life, pick up my grandchildren, be able to get from A to B, and, die an uncomplicated death. Is it that simple to talk to people in that vein, or do you have to kind of get in there and change thought patterns?
Often we change thought patterns because it's very hard to get to that space you're talking about. It's very hard to get to that future focus. Like, I'm training for my old lady body, right? You hear that summer bodies are made in the winter, but rather than that, let's talk about old lady bodies being made in our 40s. We want to be able to be strong and enter our older years with the most amount of muscle that we can and the strongest bones that we possibly can. And so those things often come with living a very healthy lifestyle, which typically leads to a very what I call a natural weight. It's kind of our walking around weight. When we have goals that are purely aesthetic, it's not that aesthetics are bad. Like, it can be fun. You can just be like, what would be fun? It would be fun to wear a bikini for my 50th birthday on a cruise. Like, that just sounds fun to me. That's great. I don't tell people that we can't have aesthetic goals. You certainly can, and you certainly can wear a bikini at whatever weight that you're at, which is another way we kind of approach this from a source of confidence. But I don't think there's any invalid reason really for wanting to lose weight, as long as it's coming from within yourself. So when I do this exercise with my clients, I ask them, why are we doing this? Why? And it's a couple weeks in, because you're excited when you first start a new program. And then a few weeks in, when it gets hard, we do this exercise. Why? Why are we doing this? And they tell me, I just want to be healthy. That's what most clients start when I first ask them. And then I say, why do you want to be healthy? And then we dig and dig and dig until we get to core reasons. And just for example, I'll give you mine. My core reason is, I want to be an influence for good on my grandchildren. And what this tells my brain is, if I'm an influence for good, that means I'm able to communicate with them in whatever way they want to communicate, which means I have to keep my brain alert and healthy so that I can use whatever app they're on. They're not going to be on Snapchat. They're not going to be on Instagram, because there will be something new when they, in 20 years. So it keeps my brain alert. It keeps my body functioning, because I want to be able to pick up my own bags and get on that airplane and go to where they are, because the chances that my grandchildren will live in Northern California where I do are very, very slim, because I know my children, they don't want to live here. Right. And so it helps me to realize, I want to keep my brain healthy. I want to keep my body healthy. And then I want to go and do and be with them in the way that they want to be. When they're little, I want to be on the floor, up and down. When they're older, I want to go to their games and their races, and wherever they are, I want to be. And so it's not that I don't want to be an influence for good on my children, right? Because my children are between 17 and 25. So they're older. Most of them don't live with me anymore. Of course, I want to be an influence on them, but thinking about how I'm going to be in 20 years when they have children really actually keeps me motivated. And so when I dig deep with clients, that's what we're looking for. And what I don't want to see, and I throw out all of the reasons that say things like, so my husband thinks XYZ, so that my children think that I'm capable. Like, your children are going to think whatever they want. It doesn't matter what you do. They get to think whatever they want. Other people get to think whatever they want. As long as your reasons stem from, I want this, this is my true goal, that is valid. We just don't want to be losing weight from a space of, so other people will like me, fill in the blank, right? So other people will think, so that other people will act in a certain way. Because those people are adults and they're going to act the way they do. And our weight or our looks or our health isn't going to make a difference to them. The chances are, if you're in a relatively happy marriage, your husband loves you regardless. So it doesn't matter. That's neither here nor there. We want to be doing things from a space of self. And if your self says, I just think it would be fun to wear a certain size, then go for it. Right? But not to please someone else.
Not to please someone else. So when it comes to weight loss, many of us been brought up with different ideologies, different rules around eating. What do you feel is maybe one of the biggest ideologies that are an actual impediment to us losing weight? For instance, don't leave anything on your plate. It's rude for, your host or your mother, or leave something on your plate. Where do you find that we have these stop and starts in dieting that aren't helpful?
Gosh, there's so many things that I could say aren't helpful with dieting. But yeah, just right there, cleaning your plate. We all seem to have this, and I know it might be different here in the US, but we talk about being part of the Clean Plate Club or cleaning your plate. And the Clean Plate Club was actually a program designed in World War I and World War II to accommodate the rations that were happening here in the US so that we had enough excess to send to recovery nations in Europe. And so in elementary schools, they developed Clean Plate Clubs. So it's very likely that our grandparents were part of the Clean Plate Club, either in, depending on your age, World War I or World War II, and the aftermath of that. And so they used those phrases. And then they used those phrases raising our parents. And then our parents used those phrases with us. And so, in the 80s, when I grew up, it was clean your plate. They're starving children in Africa rather than, in Europe. And that's true. There are starving children. In fact, there's starving children in your town, right? If you want to help with food banks and that, absolutely do that. But there is no morality to leaving food on your plate. You do not get a gold star or an award because you were able to accurately guess the needs of your body the moment you were dishing up. Like, there's no morality there. Just because you decided, you know what, I'm done, I'm full, I've had enough. You're not less good than someone who guessed correctly on their hunger. Right. And so we just want to drop the morality of cleaning your plate, that somehow that is good or better. It really gets to be a challenge, too, when we consider the portion distortion that's happening. We used to have bagels in the 80s that were 3 inches across. Now our bagels typically are 6 inches across. And this is called portion distortion. There was a study around 2016 that measured these things. They even found that in reprints of cookbooks of the same thing, like Joy of Cooking, that's been around for a long time, the same pan of brownies serves far less now. Like, the same 9x9 pan is instructed to be cut in 16 pieces rather than 24 pieces.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's really crazy. We're just told, the whole supersize thing, that these portions are the right amount to eat. which is different. Portion is different than serving size. If you turn over a package of chips that looks like a portion, but you turn it over, the nutrition facts will tell you it's the serving size is, a third of that package, that it's supposed to serve 1.5 people. And the truth is, the portion is the amount we eat, and we are being served larger and larger portions, not just in restaurants, but because we're used to seeing that, we serve them to ourselves, and we're served that as well by the instructions in our recipes. So when we have this increased portion size, and then we include that morality of I have to clean my plate, it gets very challenging to maintain your weight.
So mindset eating is really a change in the way you're approaching your plate, the way you're approaching what you're eating. Is that correct?
Yes, for sure. And the other piece about what I would consider mindset eating with my within my program is that it's very important to make your food decisions with your higher brain, your best brain. So humans, we have kind of two parts in a very simplified form of our brain for thinking. We have the higher human brain, and then we have the lower, more animal lizard brain. I love to call it the toddler brain because it wants what it wants and it wants it immediately. This is the part of the brain that we delegate all of our habits to. So this is the part of the brain that we use to brush our teeth, because you can brush your teeth and also be scrolling through your phone, or also be, walking around and doing something else, because it's such a habit. We want to take eating out of that part of the brain. We are so good at eating, we don't have to really concentrate like a toddler does about scooping up the food and getting it to our mouth. Like, that's so easy. It's such a habit. It's also a habit to come in from work and immediately go to the pantry and grab your favorite snack. That's such a habit. That's an ingrained thing we do with our lower brain. So part of mindset eating is to bring all of the eating decisions up into the higher brain. One of the ways that we can do that, there are several ways, but one way is to make all of our food decisions ahead of time, because our lower brain cannot plan ahead. Our higher brain, the human part, it's the human part because it can actually make plans for the future. It can think about 20 years in the future and about our grandkids. It can even think about 5 years in the future, 5 days, 5 hours. And so we want to think in the morning, sit down, spend 10 minutes, decide what you're eating for the day. You don't have to write down portions. You don't have to write down, certain amounts or even times. I'm just going to say, at breakfast, when I'm ready for breakfast and I'm hungry, I'm going to have a bowl of protein oatmeal. And for lunch, I'm going to have the leftover salad from last night with a side of rotisserie chicken, right? Like, you're just writing down items.
Mm-hmm.
You make all of the decisions with your higher brain. And then in that moment, your lower brain is going to argue. And she's going to say, that doesn't sound good. That sounds hard. I don't want to fix that. And that's where we really get into coaching, is managing that lower brain that isn't on board yet. And so we're just constantly trying to get that lower toddler brain part on board, and, let her just have that tantrum and eat the salad anyway. And
so do you believe in meal planning?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like a week of meal plans that fits in with your ideology?
So, yes, whatever. Honestly, this goes back to how you said there's general rules and then there's individuals. So I do meal planning differently based on the way the client cooks. I have some single women that cook just for themselves, and so their meal planning looks different than those that I've had clients with up to, I think one of my clients had like 6 or 7 children. So, her meal planning looked different because she was doing different things for lunch and breakfast for all of them. So yeah, typically what I see is that we are planning the main meal. If the woman that I'm coaching is in charge of making that, we'll plan the main meal and make grocery lists for that, and then have what I consider go-to meals for breakfast and lunch. So I have 3 or 4 breakfasts that I just rotate. And so those items always just are on the grocery list. And so it really simplifies meal planning when you're not trying to think of something new for breakfast and lunch for yourself every single day. We make that list once. We make our go-to meals list once, and then we just pick from those things. And of course, you get a lot of variety when one of the things on your go-to lunch menu is leftovers. That's often for me. So I'm often having dinner leftovers for lunch. And so it's not like I'm having the same exact thing for lunch every single day. But yeah, because it's the worst to go into the kitchen at 5 or 6 o'clock and go, oh yeah, I'm the mom. And we decided in our marriage that I'm in charge of making dinner and I don't know what to make.
I don't know what to have. Yeah.
That really is the worst,
Mhm.
right? And that's what
It becomes a
leads.
stressor too, around 4 o'clock.
Totally. Yeah.
So, I mean, good
And
habits are a part of good eating. There's no question about that. What do you
yeah.
think of, just before we hit break, I've got a couple of big questions I want to ask, but let's just do this
Okay.
tiny one. Food labeling. This is good food. This is bad food. This is junk food. This is, I need 5 of these a day. What do you think of labeling? Is it beneficial?
I think no. I think that when we label a food good or bad, we inevitably label ourselves good or bad for eating it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've all grown up with moms or sisters or aunts that said, oh my gosh, I've been so bad today. I better just order a salad tonight. Or, oh, I was so good. I deserve a treat. And being so good meant that they had, chicken and broccoli for lunch and eggs for breakfast, or what would be considered quote unquote diet food, right? That's what they're calling good. And the problem is then all of our comfort food, all of our traditional foods in different cultures, those often end up getting labeled bad. And then we have this very small amount of foods that seem like they're appropriate for us to eat. So I go with a good, better, best list. So good foods are all the foods. All the foods I like to eat. Cookies are on that list. All of the desserts I like, macaroni and cheese, those are all good foods, right? And then there's better foods that keep me energized more. There's better foods that are like convenient, like protein powders, things that kind of keep me on track, but aren't just, a lean cut of animal protein. And then there's the best foods, all of your fruits and vegetables and whole grains and things that are just kind of singular ingredient. And we want to kind of vary our diet so that we're choosing from a variety of things and noticing how we feel. Do we feel good because we've eaten? Or do we feel better? Or do we feel at our best because we had a really excellent whole food meal? Does that
That's
make
a good way.
sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And the good foods would be even gooder if we had the right portion sizes, right? So you don't
Yeah.
have to be, feel guilty about having a few chips. Back in the day, sandwich and a side of chips. I don't know, 10 chips as opposed to a bag of
Right.
chips now where you can polish it off. So it all does, it comes full circle when we're talking about it. We're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to continue on with our conversation with Lisa Salisbury.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back to our show, everybody. Lisa, how do we train that higher brain to, get us on the path to our weight loss goals?
So there's again a couple of ways that I work with my clients. Primarily what I use is what we call the thought model. This comes out of cognitive behavioral theory, and the model I specifically use is out of the life coach school. And it starts with looking at our circumstance, which is just the facts. There's food on my plate. And then we have a thought about it. I need to finish this food. I'm making this up as I go, so hopefully this model turns out. But let me just give you the whole model, and then I'll go back with the example. So we have the circumstance, which is the facts, our thought about it, and that creates a feeling. And often that thought and feeling we notice are kind of coupled and can be so close together, it's hard to tell which comes first. But we have a thought and a feeling couplet. And that drives our action or our behavior. And from that behavior, we get an overall result in our life. So often, let's just use scale weight in the circumstance. If we see the number on the scale, that is math. That's our gravitational pull on our body in that moment of time. So that's just math. And then we have a thought about it. Typically, it's something like, that's too much. or something's gone wrong, right? And then our feeling is sadness or disappointment, sometimes even shame. We get into some of that. And from those negative type emotions, our actions are rarely great, right? They're rarely like, go, get on with our day and have a normal day. They're usually like a depressed mood. We might, lash out at someone. We might end up eating a little bit more. And what does that give us as a result is certainly not more health and vitality. And so it really leads back to that thought of, yeah, this isn't great. Like something's gone wrong. So we notice that the result is always is the result of the thought and not from the actual weight or the actual circumstance, because no matter when you get on the scale, someone else is looking at that number and actually celebrating. And that's how we know that it's completely neutral, that it's a circumstance, because for someone else, that was their goal weight for the week, right? They were just trying to get down to, that was like, if I just want to lose 1 pound this week. And when they saw your number on the scale, that was their 1 pound and they're celebrating. Someone else that's their low for their whole life. They're like, this is the lowest I've ever been, and they're celebrating. And so no matter what your weight is, even if you think it's too high, someone else is celebrating that, which is how we know that the weight itself is not the issue. It's your thought about it. So when we think about using our higher brain, it's all about this thought model, is thinking about, how do I want to change my thoughts? How do I want to utilize my higher brain in order to have a different thought about my weight? And it's okay if you're like, I don't want to celebrate that weight. That's fine. But we also don't want to beat ourselves up. We can just think, this is data. This is great data. That's such a good thought for my clients, is because even if the weight has gone up, we can go, that's great data. Let me look at what I've been doing and see if I can pinpoint what's going on. And so we want to look at it as data. And that's one way we can incorporate using our higher brain, is to just think about that thought model. And I have several episodes on my podcast about the thought model, and I kind of teach it more in depth. So that's one way we engage our higher brain, is to just say, you know what, my thoughts are actually in my control. I can choose what to think when I see something or when something happens in a circumstance.
So we're rewiring to an extent. Where did we go off the rails? Because as children, you watch children, toddlers, little ones eat. When they're done, they're done. And I don't often see moms shoving food in little ones' mouths. When they're done is pretty, it's pretty accepted by the moms I see. What has happened between following and the children aren't using their higher brain, I don't imagine. I mean, they're just going with what resonates, what feels good. They're using their hunger cues and their satiation cues. Where did we go off the rails?
Usually it happens when food becomes a comfort. So I noticed there's 3 main reasons that we emotionally eat. And my definition of emotional eating is any time that we're eating that we aren't physically hungry. And we do this all the time. Everyone does it. It's not that big of a deal. It's not just crying face first into a pint of ice cream. It's any time that we're using food to soothe an emotion. And we actually teach kids this. If you've ever been to church and you see somebody, a mom feeding their young children Cheerios to keep them quiet, this is using food to soothe emotions. The child is upset, they're bored, they're fidgety, and you're like, here's some food to soothe that. So we learn at a very, very young age that food soothes our emotions. By the way, we all do this. I did this as a parent. Nothing
So did
went
I.
wrong there. It's obviously we did it. And obviously you're going to continue to do it, young moms. That's 100% fine, because you cannot not teach a child that food soothes emotions, because the truth is food works from a scientific perspective. You are not broken because food soothes your emotion. You're a human. So we use food to, I call it the three C's: to comfort, to compensate, and to celebrate. So comforting happens when we feel sad. So the emotions that we notice with when we need comfort from food is sadness, loneliness, sometimes guilt or shame. So this is when we're just feeling kind of down. Compensating happens when we're a little bit more mad. So comfort says, I really need this. And compensating says, I deserve this. I had a bad day. My boss yelled at me. I was dismissed during a meeting. I was made fun of. I deserve this. I was cut off in traffic. That person was rude to me. And we use food to compensate for some of that kind of anger. And then the third thing is we use food to celebrate. And this isn't like Christmas celebration. This is like, I finished that email. Yay, me. I deserve a treat, right? It's like the little celebrations constantly throughout the day that we're rewarding ourselves kind of like a dog, right? We're like, yeah, you went potty, here's a treat. Like we don't need that, but we have this like heightened emotion from like or relief. We're like, oh, I finished that, and we use food again to bring our emotion back to the homeostasis. So honestly, I can't remember where we started with this question, but these are the three main reasons why. Oh, it was about children. That how did we get here? It's because we learned food works to soothe emotions from a dopamine neurotransmitter point of view, from a scientific point of view. When we put food in our mouth, dopamine is released. We feel better. Again, like you're not broken. That's how it works.
Well,
But what
very
we
few are
want
the humans who just are using food as fuel. I know that
very,
there
very
are
few.
some out there, but
Yeah.
it's, there is too much to consider around all that you have said and just being, I'm eating this to get through the day. However, I want to make sure we touch on a point that I'm sure is popping up in many people's minds. Eating when not hungry is seen as a negative
Mhm.
by what you say. However, how do we equate this with the science that is, for instance, right now, 30 grams of protein each meal?
Mhm.
How do we meld the science in with the mindfulness when we are told that we need to hit certain targets throughout the day and as a totality of our daily eating? This is where it can be a little difficult for people. So, how do we make those two marry into a good relationship?
Yeah, because you're like, I have to eat all this stuff, but I'm not
Yes,
supposed to
and it
eat
can
when
be
I'm not
overwhelming
hungry.
for women.
Yeah, totally. So I would say start with one thing. Start with one of those science-y things that people tell you. So prioritize your protein is like a big thing right now. I've seen people say like I feel like I'm eating protein like it's my job. But simply saying every time I have a meal, I'm going to make sure that it has 30 grams of protein can be actually a fairly easy target, and you will be hungry for that if we eliminate all of that emotional eating in between meals. So if you are someone that eats multiple times a day, like every time you walk through the kitchen, every time you walk by your coworker's desk and grab a handful of candy, every time you go to the break room, that is where we want to pull back on
Okay.
that amount of emotional eating and keep your eating to meal times so that we are hungry for the things that we actually want to incorporate into our diet, like the 30 grams of protein or the 25 grams of fiber per day, or the 5 fruits and vegetables that we want to get. All of those kinds of high nutritional value type items will have space in your diet and in your hunger scale if we are eliminating the extra eating. And so what I call this crowding out. What do we want to crowd out? Like, okay, I'm noticing I'm eating a lot of extra food in between. I'm eating a lot of chips. What do I want to crowd that out with? And we think about what we actually want to eat to meet our goals, whether they be nutrition value goals, or just, weight loss goals. What do I actually want to eat for those goals? And we start choosing things that we want to eat rather than telling ourselves that food is off limits. So I don't want you to say, I don't want to eat chips anymore. I'd rather you say, I would like to get 25 grams of fiber per day. How am I going to do that? And when we work on those types of goals at mealtime, we are much less likely to be hungry for snacks in between, because it's all that snacking in between that then we're like, I'm not hungry and I can't possibly get 30 grams of protein down right now. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm trying to figure out how to word this. So we're not talking about food as good or bad. We're not, we're trying to hit targets as best we can when we have them. The question that pops into my mind is, generalized nutrition knowledge enough? Do you just need to know, you need 5 fruits and vegetables, have at it. You're trying to get 25 grams of protein. Is generalized nutrition enough of a place to be at for people to live a healthy life? And this is coming on the heels of a little podcast I heard by a very influential doctor who I follow, saying that, the science of nutrition is so murky, and if so individualized. And the impetus on nutrition, I won't quote exactly, but the impetus that we've put forward with nutrition may not be as strong as we thought, as food for medicine idea. Do you think generalized nutrition is enough for most people?
I do. I do think it's enough for most people. Of course, there's going to be, things like allergies and sensitivities. And nutrition science does get murky because there's so many different humans and different, needs. I always say that your food journal, just writing down the food that you eat, is the best nutritional study you will ever read.
Oh, I love food journals.
Yeah, because that's where you're going to get the information about nutrition on your body. Why do I always get bloated after a certain meal? Because what clients will come to me, they'll say, I don't know, I'm just always bloated. And I'm like, okay, let's track that. Let's figure it out. So then we do the food journal, we write down the foods, and I have them do this one extra little thing, which will be, let's give yourself a rating of 1 to 10 on bloating. 10 is the worst bloating. You feel like you got to unbutton your pants and lay down in a dark room. And 1 is 0 bloating at all. And so after every meal, I just want you to give yourself a rating. Or at the end of the day, how was I generally feeling today? And then we have data. We don't have to write a novel every day about what our body feels like. We just give it a number. And you can do this on anything, on bloating, on energy level, on your sleep, on any of that. And then you can see what might be connected with your food. The idea that food is medicine can be really dangerous, because then it says, if you got sick, it's your fault. And that's just not the case. I mean, well, I don't know. I wanted to give a hyperbole of like 99% of the time, but I can't think that way, because my dad got prostate cancer at 55, very young, and it was extremely aggressive. He did everything he could. We got the gift and the blessing of time with him. He lived for 10 years, but he passed away at 65. He grew his own garden, and we lived in Northern California, so it was a very long growing season. He had a full orchard of about a dozen different types of fruits. He grew his own cattle, and he worked outside in so a lot of moving around. He was not just at a desk. He lived the ideal lifestyle with the amount of fruits and vegetables and whole foods and fresh things and movement, and he still got sick and he still died. So if I'm like, well, food is medicine and my dad ate the wrong thing, number one, then it just feels like, how can I do better than he did? It feels very, very disheartening. And it feels like you feel really guilty every time you eat a chip. You're like, I guess I'm going to die early. You're not.
No,
not.
I agree.
And so I just don't think that's a healthy mindset space to come from. I don't care for the phrase food is medicine, because it just puts I'm all for radical responsibility. I'm all for taking care of ourselves and for doing our very best. But there's a point where genetics comes into play. There's a point where being a human comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
We are in human bodies that deteriorate over time. That's how they're built,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not Benjamin Button. We don't get younger. We get older. So I think we can use food to the very best of our abilities, and using that general nutrition. The statistics are actually staggering at how few Americans meet the My Plate guidelines. And I know obviously it's different for every country, but generally speaking, most countries will have a guideline for, hey, this is kind of the way you should eat. And the My Plate, it's just like eat some fruits and vegetables, get protein every time. Like it's much better than what they used to have that was much more heavy on the grains. But the thing is that we're all yelling about these minor characters in our diet, things like food dyes and seed oils. And the truth is, if we just ate what the government suggested, we'd be shockingly healthier.
Mm.
And people are really angry about, well, the government guidelines don't work. We have no idea if the government guidelines work because nobody follows them. So let's try that experiment.
Yeah.
But, point being is, yes, the basics are enough. Get some protein every meal. Get some produce every single day. Lots if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Heavy on the fiber and less sugar. That general nutrition will help the vast majority of people live a healthier, more energetic life.
Agreed. It's when you walk into your kitchen and you freeze up because you think you're in the middle of a science lab, it becomes a little disheartening, and it can just, you can throw your hands up in the air and say, I don't know what to do, and nothing's working. And I agree. I think that if you do, you do your reading and get an idea, but the food journal is something that I absolutely recommend when I work with people. I think it's great for them to understand what's going on. Well, that brings us to the end of the show, Lisa. So, if people are looking to work with you to get into your programs, where can we go to find you?
So my website is wellwithlisa.com. And right at the top, you'll see one of my freebies there that you can download. It's called What to Do When You Overeat. I find that nobody in the history of ever gets on a healthy path without overeating. Because again, I think I've harped on this a little bit, but we're human.
Yeah. And you know what? You're never going to pull out the emotions of eating. I'm sorry. You can work hard at it. We're going to emotionally eat every once in a while.
Absolutely. And the key is when we do that and when we overeat, what do we do next? Do we go on a super restricted diet? Do we go, I'm going to buckle down now? Or do we go throw our hands up in the air and be like, well, I've blown it now, so it's a free for all weekend? Both of those extremes are not healthy. And so my it's a 3-part video course will help you get back on track as quickly as possible and help those overeats become fewer and farther between. So you'll find that there at the top of the page. You can also find me on Instagram at well_with_Lisa. And I have a podcast called Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well, and that's available on all of the major podcast platforms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today, Lisa.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Everybody, we will talk to you next week on The Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi, here on Radio Maria Canada.